Welcome to Fostering Longevity podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Foster, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest on this episode. We will be talking to Cynthia Thurlow, who is a nurse practitioner for the past 25 years. She is an author, a podcaster, and she has written the book and done the TED Talk on intermittent fasting for women. Today, we are going to dive into everything from fasting to protein to DEXA scans and wearables and creatine and morning sunlight and all the things that we should be aware of and talking about at this stage of our lives. So please join me in welcoming this incredible guest to the podcast, Cynthia Thurlow.
For starters, I do want to thank you for taking the time. I felt such a great energy when I met you at Eudaimonia, and I just truly appreciate with all that you have going on that you have given me some of your time. So I truly appreciate it. I just want to say thank you.
No, and likewise, I felt very much a kind of kindred spirit, a tremendous amount of alignment. And when that happens, and again, it goes back to that, what we were saying before we started recording, that being very intentional, very clear where your energy goes and who you connect with and who you spend time with, and just being very cognizant of what fills you up and what does not. And so I received that wonderful compliment, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to connect with you and your community.
Thank you. Likewise, I've done a lot of diving deeper into myself this past year. I've had a gratitude practice for a while, but really getting grounded in manifesting and being really open to other people's energies. I feel like I've always had some of that in me in terms of I just know who I'm attracted to. And I feel a lot of times like when that attraction is like a mutual thing. And I recently read Jim Doty's book. Have you read Into the Magic Shop?
I have not. I'll have to add that. My ever long growing list of books.
I know, mine too.
Process.
Mine too. I will say this, Into the Magic Shop is great. It's a quick read. What was really hard for me is that he is a neurosurgeon and he starts off into the magic shop going into a 4-year-old's brain, and it describes in way too much detail than I really needed to hear what that was going to be like. And so I got through the beginning of it. It was a great book. It's really his life story about how he learned how to manifest when he was 12 years old. And then Magic Mind, I'm actually listening to right now, which is far beyond and goes a lot deeper into the brain and manifesting and all the things. If you're going to read one, I would say Magic Mind is really good. He sums up Into the Magic Shop in that one, but an amazing book.
I think it's important for all of us to continue to be inspired. I'll just share, this is the book that's sitting on my desk. I don't know if you follow young Pablo, but
yes, he's going to be in New York this week.
Oh, so good. He marked off a couple pages for me, and I do a Friday 5. It's just like a very short email on Fridays, and
I read it.
That's what I'm featuring, talking about like what I'm learning and experiencing, because it is a book that just draws you in and it makes you feel. I don't want it to sound trite, but it makes you profoundly grateful and appreciative if you've done some of the work, because you start to see what comes from that. And I'm just a huge admirer of his. So How to Love Better, I think, is something that all of us, and we say all of us, irrespective of where we are in our own little journeys, something that we can get a lot of value out of. And it's beautifully written. Just his prose and the way he uses language to convey emotion is something that I really value, because I don't write like that. So for me, I really appreciate that in him for sure.
Yeah, I saw that he was going to be in New York this week. I think it's actually tomorrow night or Wednesday night. And so I was like, oh, can I clear my schedule and get to the city? Because every post that he puts out there on Instagram, I am profoundly touched by. And to your point, I think it's doing the deep inner work. And one of the books that Brian and I, so my husband and I have a book club together. So we sit down, we figure out like what books we want to read this year. And with this whole new fostering longevity journey that we're on and really working a lot more in tandem together, one of the books that we both just listened to is The Way of the Superior Man. I don't know if you've heard of it or if you've read it, but it's really about teaching men, and I read it because he read it, but teaching men to understand that at the end of the day, it's really just about love. And if you can put some of your own shit aside and really just love forward on the woman in your life, you'll have such a better life. And we're all about fostering longevity is really life, love, and longevity. And you have to be able to love the person that you look at in the mirror every day. And if you can do that, you can truly put yourself out there as your best, most beautiful self for other people. And one of the things that we are going to focus on our retreats is that it's about going deep and leaving your ego at the door when you walk in and just being your most vulnerable self and putting yourself out there in a really uncomfortable way for a lot of people that don't put themselves out there like that.
Yeah, I love that you're doing that. And if you look at the research on longevity, loneliness is something that is a prognostic indicator for longevity. So I remind people all the time, and I think about a parent that passed away last year who was profoundly lonely, probably the last 5 to 10 years of his life, largely because his spouse had significant dementia and Alzheimer's. And so I say to my husband all the time, what are the things that we're going to do that are different than things our parents did? Sometimes they're not really realizing that the choices that they're making that impact that. But loneliness is as toxic as smoking. And I think for a lot of people, they need to understand that to a degree of, I'm an introvert, I love time by myself, but that's different than people who feel they've lost a sense of connection to others and how impactful that can be long term.
Yeah, that's why I moved my mom to New York a year ago. She was lonely in Florida by herself, not seeing us enough and starting to have early onset dementia. And we said, this is where she needs to be. She needs to be surrounded by people. Even if she spends a lot of time in her apartment, I know that she's like down and seeing people for dinner every night. And to your point, we stopped drinking 2 years ago, and seeing my mother with dementia was a big reason for us stopping alcohol. And we went down this, let's start drinking just clean alcohol and then just clean wine. And then we were like, we're done. That was like actually a really big moment for me in terms of my own inflammation. If I could scream from a rooftop that alcohol is just poison and we should not be consuming it in any way, shape, or form. And I've got the numbers to show you. I was inflamed for years, and having a colonoscopy after quitting alcohol a year later, the numbers were significantly different.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, I think there's definitely a tide that's starting to shift. I worked in clinical cardiology for over 16 years, and we used to encourage our patients to have a glass of wine, get some resveratrol. It's beneficial, it's relaxing. And now you examine the research in many instances that is actually paid for by the alcohol industry. And you start to think, maybe that 2 to 3 glasses of wine a night is not as benign and innocuous as we've been led to believe. And so I think for many people, that's just not part of, I had a guest, she called it sober curious. Many people are just not consuming alcohol as frequently. Maybe they're doing it very infrequently or not at all. And so I always invite patients to consider the possibility, if they're having a lot of health issues, if they're struggling with weight loss resistance, they're struggling with sleep quality, maybe it's time to consider eliminating some inflammatory foods and seeing how you feel. So I love that you did that little experiment and felt so much better. And that just reaffirms why I think it's so important for us to consider that we might need to change and pivot throughout our lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. So I know that we can, I honestly feel we could have a 3-hour podcast or 3-hour conversation here right now, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So I will officially kick it off and just say, again, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, which has taken a little bit of a pivot from, foster your passion to fostering longevity and really focusing on health and wellness. And so you were an instrumental part of the beginning of my health and wellness journey. And when I look back at the book that's sitting behind you, I realized that I bought that book in 2022, which must have been when you just published. And so the quick story is I had read Superhuman by Dave Asprey, and then I read Fast This Way because we really got interested in intermittent fasting. And then he had probably like a paragraph on fasting for women. And I was like, this has got to be different for women. We have hormones. We're we're very different structurally than men. I'm sure there is more to learn about women. And so I must have just Googled you or Googled it and you came up and I read your book. I loved it. I passed it on to multiple people. It's literally sits right here on my bookshelf. So that was my introduction to you. And fast forward, I've been following you for years. I love the podcast. I love everything you're doing. And I have a ton of questions for you today as an author, a podcaster, an entrepreneur. You now have a supplement line, which congratulations. That's amazing. And you have a manuscript that is with an editor right now. And so I'm super excited for that. But I have to say that it was such a meaningful day meeting you in person at Eudaimonia. I just bought my tickets for next year. I'm excited. I hope you're going to be there again. But it was just, I felt like that conference was just such a great way for people that are in the space and doing the work, getting such great exposure to people like you who are leading the way for people that are interested in health and wellness and longevity, and then seeing you again at Longevity Fest and you giving me a few minutes of your time and then your time today. So thank you so much. I know you're such a busy woman. And again, I do feel like we could talk for hours, but again, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm glad we could make it come to fruition because I know you were patiently waiting for me to submit that manuscript, which I did officially last week.
Congrats. Yeah, I can't wait. And when can we expect the book?
2026. So the way that it works, my editor goes through the first draft, makes suggestions. I think it's pretty much done. I don't think we're going to have a lot of editing, but hopefully officially accepted in another month. And then it starts the process. And for anyone that's not familiar with the traditional publishing realm, it can take 6 to 9 months for a book once it's accepted to be published. I don't have a publication date yet. It's been like left in limbo. And I have a feeling that despite me wanting to publish a little later in the year, I may be a book that comes out at the beginning of 2026. So we'll see. We shall see very soon.
Well, we're looking forward to it. So can you just give a little bit of background on, I know you went through your own health situation, but what got you into intermittent fasting initially?
I think I'm like most perimenopausal females that I never had trouble losing weight after my pregnancies. I exercised, I did all the right things. And then I came in at 1,000 miles an hour into a wall in perimenopause. And suddenly, despite, taking all of the advice that I was dispensing to patients, it wasn't working. And out of utter frustration, I came to intermittent fasting in perimenopause with a desire to lose weight, but stayed for all the other benefits. So this is more than 10 years ago. For me, it really was one of these things where I didn't initially lose weight, but I just felt so much better that it became something that I would talk about with anyone that was willing to listen to me. And sometimes that was patients and sometimes it was family members or friends. And so from there, obviously, it turned into so much more. But I look at intermittent fasting as a strategy that people can utilize at specific times in their lives, and people like to do it continuously without a break. I think it really just depends on the individual and what their specific reasons are for fasting to begin with. But it can be a very powerful strategy, and especially for middle-aged women who begin that slippery slope of symptoms and things they haven't experienced before and be utterly frustrated. And more often than not, traditional allopathic medicine just saying things like, this is just the way things are. Your X age, weight gain should just be a normal function of aging, which nothing made me more angry than hearing that from my primary care provider, who then got replaced by someone new. I think for a lot of women listening, it's understanding that middle-aged pause, whether it's perimenopause or menopause, is really a time to look very carefully at our lives, not just lifestyle, but personal relationships, and see what is working and what is not, and whether or not fasting is something that is good to integrate into what you're already doing.
And so here's where, I love fasting. It transformed my body back when I started doing it in 2022. But now I'm further along on I love how you call it middle pause journey. And I'm starting to feel like I've got those stubborn couple of pounds that are just sitting there. And then I listen to someone like Stacey Sims, who says, you cannot work out in a fasted state. And I'm like a 5:45 a.m. workout person. And so I'm at that impasse right now. I'm like, okay, what do I do? Do I not work out in a fasted state? I also wear a glucose monitor. I've been doing that on and off for 3 years, which is incredibly informative. But I'm at that point where, like probably many women, you're trying so many different things. You hear so many different opinions. Like, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I can tell you, having interviewed Stacey Sims, for me, that was a really impactful interview because we talked a lot about my fasting journey and what I'm doing differently. So let me back up and say that one of the things that contributed to my father's death in 2024 was frailty. We go through this process where we lose muscle, we become frail, frailty leads to falls, falls can lead to breaking hips or hitting heads. And in my dad's case, he had a head bleed and never recovered.
I'm so
That was
sorry.
it was last year, was a lot. But I took that as a reminder because I am my father's daughter. We look very similar. We have the same kind of body habitus. That I was like, if I don't start doing something differently, I could end up just like my dad. And so that hit me very profoundly. And from that moment forward, starting in June of last year to now, I started eating before workouts. I started eating more protein because now I want to be really conscientious about building muscle. It doesn't mean that I don't still fast, but on days that I lift heavy things, I do not fast. I may have 12 to 13 hours of what I refer to as digestive rest. I may have, I have one day with my trainer where I work out in the afternoon. So obviously I probably have had 2 meals before I see her. One day out of the week, I work out early. And so I make sure I have 20 grams of protein, usually 30, before I see her. And what I've come to find is that my lifting has gotten better. I'm stronger. I'm seeing more muscle definition. Of course, the other question I get is, are you gaining weight? My body composition is shifting, but the reason why it's shifting is because I'm building muscle and losing body fat. And what I would say is that for me personally, I do believe to some degree, if you're lifting weight, the days you lift weight, I think there is value in having protein earlier in your day. I do think it's really important to be making sure you're getting enough protein on a daily basis because what people don't realize is that slippery slope of frailty happens so slowly for most of us. It's happening when we hit 40. And for women that were on birth control from their teens into their 20s, which is most of my generation, lost out on building peak bone and muscle mass already. So we're already at a disadvantage. So I think that when I answer these kinds of questions, I would say that my perspective has shifted. I still see the value in fasting, but on days that I lift heavy things, I do not fast. I make sure I've got a 12-hour feeding window. I'm making sure I'm getting 3 boluses of protein. And on the mornings before I lift with my trainer, and she laughs at me because she knows I walk in with, I've had a banana and I probably have had a protein shake. And that's just what works for me. There might be something else that works for someone. I don't want anything heavy in my stomach. That is what I've started doing differently. And I've started to see changes in body composition, although subtle. Like if you were to see me with clothes on, you wouldn't say, wow, Cynthia now looks like she's going to go into a professional bodybuilding. That's not what I'm talking about. But those shifts in body composition have been noticeable. And I think are directly attributable to some changes that I've made with regard to when I fast and when I don't fast.
Have you done a DEXA scan?
I've been doing, so I do bioimpedance scans. So I've done
Okay.
DEXAs. I am osteopenic, but I've been osteopenic for forever. And for anyone that's listening, osteopenia is not a diagnosis. It is comparing your bone to a 25-year-old that's not osteoporosis. I'm a thin Caucasian woman, but my grandmother's had osteoporosis. Most of my aunts have osteoporosis. So we keep a very close eye on it. I'm getting DEXAs almost every year. My bone markers are being followed very closely, but this is where I've been for a long time. It's not something that's new. It's not like I went from being perimenopausal to menopausal and then suddenly became osteopenic. Our working hypothesis is that years and years of oral contraceptives to fix irregular periods when I was a late teen into my 20s, into my early 30s is
Makes sense.
probably what has also contributed to never putting down really healthy bone up until I was 32 years old. And I think now we try to stay on top of them. The DEXAs are great. Bod pods are great. Bioimpedance scales. Like my physician has a very fancy bioimpedance scale. It's not the kind of scale you would have in your home, but he monitors me usually every quarter. And so I get a sense of, I think his recommendation was, I want you to lose 7 pounds of body fat and gain 5 pounds of muscle. But he said, what I want you to hear from me is I'm not telling you to lose weight. I'm telling you to put muscle on. And that will be a
Right.
byproduct of that. I think that for so many of us, like changing the way that we do things can sometimes seem overwhelming, at times uncomfortable. But I do think for those of us that are middle aged, we just have to be honest with ourselves about what is working, what is not. And I needed to put on some muscle. So changes needed to be made. And that in itself means I'm not fasting 7 days a week anymore.
Same. So I just did a program with 25 people wearing glucose monitors, which was really fun. I do it because I love to see the data and I always make sure I'm going to switch things up when I put a new one on. And so my switching things up this time was eating before a workout. And we use NutriSense, not to plug NutriSense, but we use them for our group. And they now have a nutritionist. If you apply with your insurance, they'll let you know how many sessions you get. And so I have unlimited sessions. So my nutritionist said, I know this sounds crazy, but just get like an organic baby food. And it's going to give you just the right amount of sugar, just the right amount of carbs, and make sure you eat a protein meal after you work out, but eat the baby food before you go. And what I love about wearables like a glucose monitor and an Aura ring, I can see how my body is reacting in real time. So I could see that on the days where I wasn't doing a baby food before the gym and I was doing a little bit more of I do a little bit high intensity / strength training. Sometimes I'll just skip the cardio and I'll just add in more heavy weights. I was doing a lot of up and down after that workout because my blood sugar couldn't regulate. And then with the baby food, it doesn't even spike me. And then I'm riding this really nice, smooth rolling hills all day, which is great. And it keeps me in like a very good metabolic state. I love wearables. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, do you wear wearables? Have you tried a CGM? Okay.
Yeah. I probably wore a CGM continuously for 2 or 3 years. And then I needed a break. I had my Aura ring for 3 or 4 years now. I'm a big devotee, but I don't let the Aura ring dictate my life. I like to use it as a check-in. I like to actually track my deep sleep because I think that's very important. But as an example, I got RSV, so I got a virus in January, and it was like 2 days before I felt sick. My HRV tanked, my heart rate variability tanked, and my Aura kept bugging me. Do you want me to put you into rest mode? And I was like, no, I feel great. Like allowed me to get a sense for my heart rate was up, my HRV was down, my temperature was up, which is certainly suggestive of something was brewing. And so I kept it in rest mode for a couple days until I felt better. But I do think wearables can be very helpful. I do have a couple patients that tend to be higher anxiety individuals. And so sometimes we'll say, all right, we're going to use this tool for a couple months and then we're going to take a break. I do think for the right person, it can be highly motivating. I think on a lot of different levels that now that we have technology at our fingertips, it can be both beneficial. It can also be this dual-edged sword, which again, for individuals that tend to be more highly anxious or tend to be more obsessive, sometimes that can be problematic. But and more often than not, I think it helps correct behaviors where it allows me to see, as an example, I don't have a lot of vices in life, but every once in a while I want a gluten-free brownie. And I had a couple last week because quite frankly, it was super stressful to get that manuscript in. And I was saying to my husband, it's amazing to me how attuned I am to my body that if I eat a big meal and then have a brownie, it's a very different glucose variability than if I just decide at 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to make gluten-free brownies. And I have a brownie at 8 o'clock at night, having had a meal 3 hours before. Very different. Trending not only my Aura ring data, but also if I'm wearing a glucometer, the impact on my blood sugar is completely different. So I think they can be really valuable, provided that you keep the big picture in perspective. Like you don't allow yourself to get caught up in, as I refer to, minutia of information. It's okay, let's just make sure that we're not getting into a position where we can't actually enjoy our lives because it's like a live and die by my metrics on my smartwatch, my Aura ring, my glucometer. Just remember, we're looking at trends, like overall trends are what are most important.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier because I think a lot of women get worried about putting on the weight. at any stage. We don't even have a scale in this house. My stepson brings his scale back and forth between his mom's and here. So it's like every other week I may get on the scale. But for women that are getting on every day, I think for people that are very in touch with their bodies and very aware, the reason I knew is like it wasn't a number for me. It was actually a feeling. I could feel it, I could see it. And I got on the scale. I also did an in-body scan and saw that I had put on visceral fat, which is not the fat that we want to be putting on. And coming off of the year I had, I'm giving myself a lot of grace. And I think that's something that women need to also take into account is that we are at this very fragile stage in our lives where our bodies are changing, our brains are changing, our hearts are changing. We're going through so many different changes that a lot of women that I talk to also, they worry about, I don't want to be all big and bulky. And we're going to lead into the creatine in a minute because I have been recommending creatine for the last 2 years since I've been taking it. And women are like, I'm going to feel bloated and puffy and I don't want to put on muscle mass. So that being said, in addition to the strength training, one of the things that really worked for me too was creatine. And by the way, I love the flavor of your creatine. I usually just mix mine into my greens because I don't want to taste it. But now that you have a flavored one, it's nice to have as a separate drink in the morning before the gym. So congratulations on the supplement line because I can't even imagine how much went into that in addition to you writing a manuscript at the same time. We're going to talk about your self-care in a minute, but I do want to ask you, there are so many different supplements and creatines on the market. Like what possessed you to want to create your own?
I think that there's a couple things. So number one, for listeners to understand, like I've been a nurse practitioner for 25 years. Like I was a very young nurse practitioner. I started in my 20s and I am incredibly savvy with supplements. So when I transitioned from traditional allopathic medicine now almost 9 years ago, I wanted to be able to offer a lot to my patients and clients. And so I get frustrated when I am searching for options for a patient and I don't find what I want. And by that, pharmaceutical grade, really high quality, transparency about messaging, testing for gluten and dairy and things that I think are important to be conscientious about. So I think my initial desire was just to do something different. And I didn't want a white label. So for listeners, white labeling means a company allows you to put your own labels on their products, which I didn't like that because it doesn't make a lot of financial sense, although it's gratifying to have your own labels on products. And I co-branded supplements with a company that I'm no longer working with, and creatine came up without question. I was like, this is a foundational supplement. This is something I take every day. My entire family takes it. It's safe. There's a lot of research. And so for me, it's both a desire to only utilize things that I know have been well researched and also to have control over how things are created. So creatine was an easy decision. I've taken a lot of heat because when we created this new creatine, I could not create the same thing. I have a binding agreement with the predecessor that I cannot create just plain creatine until have no longer been attached to one another for an entire year. And then when I started looking, what are the things about creatine that can help you absorb better? Quality is important. Most creatine is produced in China because it's cheap to do it there. And the kind of methodology for how the creatine is created is important. Some women and men for that matter do get bloating. They'll tell me that they gain weight. They just feel puffy. That shouldn't happen, right? And so quality is really important. And that's why when we created this product, was like, what can we do to add potency to make it a better product? And how can we elevate the quality of the product? And so that was the impetus to do it on our own. I always say I play nice with others in the sandbox, but ultimately I want to have full control over everything, which is why we created our own supplements. And I've been pleasantly surprised with how much people have liked the product because it's different. It's a stick pack. It's not in a bag. It's not in a container. You can take it with you. You don't have to worry about going through TSA. Everyone's always worried about TSA. And I'm like, listen, TSA has seen so many crazy things. If they're worried about what you're carrying as a powder, they can test it. So don't let that be a concern. But for me, now I have ultimate control. And now it's really curating products that every middle-aged woman can use safely that has really good science-based basis behind the products and the formulation. And so that's where it came from. But I look at creatine as a foundational product for everyone. And that's not just women. That's my teenagers take it. My husband takes it. Most of my family, extended family also take it just because they do see the importance. They do see the value in maintaining strength. We were talking about frailty earlier. And I think for a lot of people, there's now emerging research on brain benefit and bone benefit and jet lag. Like I travel quite a bit and I'm one of those people that I don't have jet lag anymore. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm so conscientious about creatine loading around travel and how that has saved me. Because there's nothing worse than getting on stage somewhere or sitting down and do a podcast with someone and you're having trouble trying to remember words. Like that is never what you want to have happen. So I think that's where the creatine and the product line came from. And we have other products that are coming along with it. It's just we couldn't do everything all at once. You have to bide your time, make sure things are going well before you bring on new products. But that's where the impetus came from.
You've got how many in the line?
There's 5, and we have 2 more that we're working on right now. So those 2, there's an inositol, which is one of my favorite supplements, myo-inositol, with a little twist. It'll have some ashwagandha in it, which is a tonifying adaptogenic herb, really helpful, especially for women, whether you're dealing with energy issues or dealing with sleep issues. That's the beautiful thing about this adaptogenic herb is it's very helpful for that. And again, both at myo-inositol and ashwagandha are really well researched, really well studied. And so I think from that perspective, it's as we add products, they're going to be things that I personally use every day. And they're going to be things that most of my female patients and clients really benefit from taking regularly.
And are you taking just 1 stick pack a day or do you do 2?
It depends. So if I'm traveling and I know I'm traveling time zones, I will start front loading dosing. I'll start with 10 grams the 2 to 3 days prior, and then I'll continue that while I'm traveling. So I'll be in Spain in April. And my cousin laughs at me, but she's, you are the most hydrated person I've ever met. But that's one of those things like creatine and hydration go hand in hand. So while I'm traveling, I will increase it to 10 grams, but generally 5 grams a day and generally 1 packet a day, unless there's something like sleep deprivation. Like I can tell you right now, daylight savings occurred on Saturday night. I have a puppy that does not believe that daylight savings applies to him. So I was up at 6 o'clock, which was really 5 a.m. to get him. And I said to my husband, you can sleep and it'll take another hour for him to wake up, but I'll deal with the puppy. And so today I will probably have 2 doses because it also helps with jet lag. This is not, sleep deprivation. This is not to encourage women not to sleep enough. It's to help you understand it'll make your brain function better on days when you haven't had enough sleep. And for me, I need a solid 7 to 8 hours. And I think my Oura Ring's at 6.5. Having said that, this next week, I think for most of us, we're going to be feeling a little bit behind from where we would normally be. It's like spring forward, fall back. Fall, we always get a break. Spring always is harder. There's more heart attacks, more car accidents. All the statistics demonstrate that losing that hour really does make a big difference in how we navigate our lives.
Yes, we lose the hour, but we gain the sunlight. So get out there, do an evening walk, right?
Yeah.
After dinner, get out, enjoy, take advantage of it because that'll also help people sleep.
Yes.
Yeah,
Getting sunlight
that.
exposure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, they get out in the morning and they're walking and they put their sunglasses on. And I always tell people, like, we have 3 dogs. We walk our dogs every morning, every evening. And one of the best things that I look forward to is getting that light exposure on my eyes in the morning because it's reminding my body, okay, it's time to suppress melatonin. It's time to increase cortisol. That is physiologically how it happens. And we have these little clocks throughout our body. And it's this mechanism of communication. So we know you'll actually get better sleep when you have light exposure in the morning, and then you're not having as much exposure to light at night. That's what helps facilitate secretion of melatonin, which is that hormone that is a master antioxidant that helps our bodies cue that interrelationship with telling us to go to sleep.
It's funny you say that about the sunglasses because I went for a walk this morning with my functional medicine doctor. And I brought my sunglasses with me and I was like, no, I'm going to leave them on my head. And just remember that I should not be wearing sunglasses on this walk when I should be getting sunlight in my eyes, especially because of the savings. So I was going to ask you some of your biggest tips for helping people get those 7 to 8 hours sleep again in this little pause journey. It is one of the hardest things. And I have to say that for me, I have like my own little sleep stack that I take at night that really I find super helpful. And we've gone to red lights in the house at night for the 30 to 45 minutes leading up to bedtime. We don't turn the overhead lights on in our room. We just have these big red light panels. Kids think we're crazy. That's red light time. But for us, it's super helpful. I have one next to my bed and then it just turns off. What are some of the things that you recommend for people to implement in their lives to help them get those 7 to 8 hours? Because it is not easy.
Yeah, no, I would say number one, you have to make it a priority. I know that people don't like to hear this. They'll say, I've got demands on my time. I'm like, I get it. I just finished a book manuscript and it was a slog for 6 months. It really was. But at 9 o'clock at night, I was like, I'm done with writing. Like, it didn't matter what I was working on. I think we have to have constraints over when we are working, like clear boundaries around when we're working, when we're not working. And as an entrepreneur, this you could work 24/7. The work will always be there, but it isn't ultimately good for us to be in a position where we're constantly engaged. Number one, making sleep a priority. Number two, exercising. People don't realize like the days I lift, I sleep even better than I do on the days I don't lift. And so I've just started noticing this trend. And even on the days when I work out hard in the morning, by 8 o'clock at night, my body's, you need to go to bed. It is time to go to bed. So not only exercise, but being attuned to how your body is feeling and whether or not it's time to go to bed earlier. I think that we have to be thinking about sleep when we wake up in the morning. And I know that's not sexy. And that's why that light exposure piece is certainly helpful. Not eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, avoiding or limiting alcohol. For me personally, I like to have my body knows there's just a certain rhythm in which I do things in the evening. I don't necessarily get in front of a red light every night. There are certain things that I will integrate. There's certain supplements that I will integrate, the things that I think for me personally, depending on when I was book writing, there was a whole lot more brain support, glycine, phosphatidylserine, more adaptogens to try to modulate my stress response. Now I'm back to my normal sleep stack, and that could be magnesium, that could be myo-inositol, that could be adaptogenic herbs. I do take melatonin most nights. I take a very low dose, but I do think melatonin, and we make less of it with age. And so when people fearmonger and say it's terrible, you shouldn't take supplemental melatonin, I don't know if I agree with that. Just like we don't make the same estrogen or progesterone as we get older, my sleep would be a disaster if I wasn't on hormone replacement therapy on top of that. I think that a cool, dark room. So our thermostat's set to 65 degrees in summer and winter. It doesn't matter. My family has acclimated to being a little bit colder in the house at night. They don't mind. We all like to sleep with covers on top of us. I think that getting off electronics, it's easy to say that. It's sometimes hard to implement. Reading a physical book can be very helpful. I just mentioned How to Love Better, and the other book I'm reading is by Charles Piller. It's called Doctored. It's all about the Alzheimer's controversy around the research, how the research hasn't been particularly solid. That will get me to bed sooner, not because it's not an excellent resource. It's just, it's a serious book. It's not a lighthearted book.
Yeah.
So reading a physical book, and I think we don't have a TV in our bedroom, and I'm not judging those that do. If you do have TV in your bedroom, you're probably going to lay in bed and watch TV and maybe stay up longer. I wear blue blockers. I have a sleep mask. Some nights I will take a hot bath or hot shower to help with sleep induction. It just depends on what I think I need. But the really cool thing is, even with all the things that I've alluded to that happened in 2024 that were not great, and then my husband got sick, the one thing that I take great pride in is the things that I do make a difference, because I just had a 24-hour saliva cortisol pattern taken and my cortisol was pristine. And so when I say I actually do what I preach, I really do. And I think it makes a big difference, not only in my mental health, but also in my sleep quality. But those are like the high level things that I think about. There's lots of gadgets. I love gadgets. I have a Somnox, which looks like a bean that you hug to your chest. It'll help with sleep induction. I've got an Apollo Neuro. I've got Brain Tap. I have lots of gadgets, but those are not the things that I use regularly. Those are things that are nice to have when I feel like I need additional support. But the high level things that generally cost little to nothing are the most important foundational aspects. And unfortunately, we as a culture love gadgets. I get it. I'm a gadget person. I like data, but I tell everyone, like, don't go spend $700 or $1,000 on an Ooler. Sorry, I don't mean to pick that on them. Chill pad, whatever device. It made too much noise. But we were gifted one, and I literally slept on it once and told my husband, like, we like quiet, and it was just noisy.
Yeah.
But people will go and they'll buy something like that instead of actually doing the foundational work. And that's the stuff that you fall back on again and again. And so even when I'm traveling, even when I'm crossing time zones, those things tend to be pretty consistent because I think it makes that big of a difference.
Do you have a favorite device? It's actually one of my questions for you.
Favorite device? Yes, but it's expensive and it was gifted to me. And so I always use that as a caveat that I'm not sure I would have necessarily invested. Not that I don't think it's a great. I think Somnox is really interesting. It looks like a bean that you hold when you sleep and it'll acclimate to your breathing and it helps with sleep induction, but it is very expensive. And that's why I keep saying that's not in everyone's budget. So I don't want to press that that's something that people need to buy. But if you have a disposable income and that's something you really want to do, I think that's great. The other thing that I would say that I didn't mention is breath work, meditation, legs up the wall. I'm big on breath work. I've done holotropic breathing. My functional medicine doc was trying to get me to do that for about 6 months, and I finally did it last September. I think that can be very powerful. Again, these are not things that per se cost money. They just, you have to
Right.
set aside the time. But I would say gadget wise, the coolest sleep thing I've ever used is Somnox.
I have a million more questions, but as an entrepreneur, an author, doing all the things, like what is your biggest self-care tip? What do you do for yourself?
I think being really clear about boundaries. As a reformed people pleaser, most healthcare providers are people pleasers. They really are. They really want to help people. They want to give and give and give. But the most important thing that I've learned over the past 10 years is the value of saying no. And my team knows this. If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And we, as one example, we receive far more requests to do interviews and conversations and collaborations than we could ever possibly do. So I usually will say to my team, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And it's not that I don't care because I care profoundly, but being clear about my boundaries and when I work and when I don't work is one of the most important lessons I've had to learn because this is why women burn out. We continue giving and giving until we get grumpy and irritable. And for me, being irritable is a sign that I'm not respecting my own boundaries. And my team will mention this to me frequently. Remember what you said, remember what you said, remember what you said. So I think the most important self-care measure that I have learned, it's not all the gadgets. It's not the lifting the weights, although that's very important. I honor my body by eating healthy. I prioritize sleep. But the most important thing, if I could suggest this to any person listening, learning the value of saying no and respecting your boundaries. Because if you don't learn that lesson, you will end up being one of these patients that I have in my practice who are burned out on both sides because they constantly give and give and they don't take care of themselves. And by that, I mean, they could still be working out. They could still be eating pristinely, but they haven't learned the value of saying no.
Okay. Rapid fire. Meal prep or do you wing it?
The honest answer is I'm married to an engineer who loves to do meal prep. So I'm going to say meal prep.
Okay. Home cooked or dining out?
Home cooked always.
Yeah. I figured the answer was that going to be that, but I think it's important for people to know that cooking at home is a much better solution for many things. What's on your bucket list? You've done so many amazing things. I want to know what's on your bucket list.
Right now, so our youngest will be applying to college for 2026. And so all the trips that we have not taken because I didn't want to be that far away from them when they were younger are on the horizon. So I'm not sure if that's going to be Asia or that's going to be New Zealand, but those have been the trips that we've been talking about our entire marriage. And so that's probably one big thing. I think that my other big bucket list is just having the ability to continue to make decisions in my business that ultimately free up my time. That's one thing that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they use the term hustle. It's that language around choices that they're making. And I always say, no, the greatest luxury is time. Being able to make time to travel and have experiences. And so that's probably the biggest thing is like starting to dream about, okay, we really take this 3-week long trip. What's that going to look like?
If you do go to New Zealand, let me know. I have some recommendations. I was there a long time ago, probably 20 years, but it was probably one of the most unbelievable, memorable trips I will ever take in my life. It was just amazing. So it
Amazing.
included a lot of wine at the time, but I can leave that off the agenda if it's not for you. I'm going to assume we're in the same age range, but one tip you could give people, because your skin looks so amazing. I've seen you in person. It's just as amazing in person.
Thank you. I know this doesn't sound like sexy. I would say one extreme, hydration is chronically underappreciated and undervalued. So being hydrated. But I also think like whatever decision you make about how you want to treat your skin as you get older, because I hate the word anti-aging. I just do. It's like aging is a privilege, whether it's using topical retinoids, whether it's doing a laser, whether you go to the other extreme and you want to do surgical interventions. I don't care what people choose to do. It's just find something that works for you. I typically will do laser, if not every year, maybe every couple of years. I think it's made a big difference. I do topical retinoids. I do use really good quality skincare. I do think that makes a difference for me personally. But I would say all the other things, like just having a healthy sense of self, like as you are aging, as you are getting older, coming to peace with what that looks like for you. And like I said, I have girlfriends that run the gamut from people who don't want to do anything to people who want to use every gadget available and every product. And somewhere in between is probably where most people are. But I think that just having an honest conversation, like what works for you, what works for your budget, what makes you feel like you're in alignment with your values, and then defining what doesn't. So I think that's also really clear, intentional, and important.
You look great. I just started a gua sha routine, and I have to say, absolutely. Not only do I like it for how it makes my skin feel, but it's 5 minutes I get to just spend on myself. Like we do our hair, we do our makeup, but
Yeah.
this is like a pampering self-care ritual that I really have just started enjoying, as I take this time twice a day just for me
Oh, that's
to
amazing.
just, yeah, it feels so good. All right. I know you have to run. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share with people? I know you have a course, you have a one-on-one practice, so you've got your supplement line, your podcast, all the things, which will all be in the show notes. If you need to find Cynthia, I'll give you all the places to find her. But is there anything that really rises to the top for you right now in terms of how you want to serve more people? I love that you want to impact 1 million people. Actually, it's one of the things I say all the time. I don't need $1 million. I just want to impact as many people as possible.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing is just if people want to follow on social media, if they want to subscribe to the podcast, they want to check out what I've written, blog posts. We just finished a blog post on Element because I've been asked 590
Yes,
times
thank you.
what my feelings
Thank
were
you.
on that. And I felt like finally when the book manuscript was done, I could talk about it. Or if you want to join us for any of our programs that we run throughout the year, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to connect with you. And obviously I'll be happy to come back anytime to continue the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much again. Truly appreciate you. I love all that you do, all that you're putting out there. I was so happy to see the article on Element, because people have said to me, because I recommend it all the time, they're like, oh, you heard they're doing this, I heard they're doing that. I'm like, no, we understand. So coming from you, I'm now going to point people in that direction, actually. So
Well, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, and have an amazing day. This has been great. Again, I could talk to you for 2 more hours, but I know you have to go. And so
Thanks,
thank you.
Hayley. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you too.
Bye-bye.